For more than 60 years, pacemakers have been this absolute miracle of medicine. But if you think about it, their basic design hasn't really changed all that much. It's always been a battery pack under the skin with wires running to the heart. Well, that's all changing. A huge revolution is happening right now in cardiac pacing, and it's all about getting rid of those wires for good.
I mean, just think about that for a second. What if you could have a pacemaker that fits completely inside your heart? No wires, no bumps under your skin. It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, doesn't it? But it's not. It's happening today. And this one question is what's driving this massive transformation in cardiology.
And this is why it matters so much, 10%. That's roughly how many patients with a traditional pacemaker run into complications related to the device. And when you trace those problems back to their source, it's almost always one of two things: that surgical pocket they create for the battery, or the wires, the leads that run from it.
All right, so let's really get into the heart of the problem here. For decades, the weakest link in pacemaker technology has always been the wires. Doctors call them transvenous leads. And it makes sense, right? These are thin, flexible wires that have to bend and flex with every single heartbeat, millions and millions of times a year. It's honestly no surprise that they can break, get infected, or even cause clots in the veins.
So have a look at this. This diagram shows you the classic setup perfectly. Over on the left, you've got the generator. That's the battery. It gets implanted under the skin of the chest, creating what's called a surgical pocket. And from there, you see the leads, those wires, being threaded through a big vein all the way down into the heart. Now, this design has saved countless lives for sure, but as you can see, it also creates all these potential points of failure, from infections in that little pocket to the leads themselves just wearing out over time.
So, what's the answer? Well, the idea itself sounds simple, but actually pulling it off, that was a huge technological challenge. The goal was to build a pacemaker that's completely self-contained, a tiny little capsule that can live and work entirely inside the heart.
And wow, this slide just says it all, doesn't it? Look at the difference. On the left, the old system with all its parts, and on the right, the leadless pacemaker. It's something like 93% smaller than a traditional one, literally no bigger than a large vitamin pill. No pocket, no wires. It's a total game changer.
Now, this didn't happen overnight, not by a long shot. The idea was actually first tested way back in 1970. But it took more than 40 years of miniaturization and engineering to finally make it a reality for patients. That first human implant in 2012 was a massive moment, which led to the first FDA approval in 2016, and then, just very recently, the approval of systems that can pace 2 chambers of the heart.
Okay, so we got rid of the wires. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. It actually created a whole new challenge. See, the heart's upper and lower chambers have to beat in a very specific coordinated rhythm. And those first leadless devices, they only sat in the lower chamber, so they couldn't really sync up with the top one.
And that coordination has a name: atrioventricular synchrony, or just AV synchrony for short. And it is absolutely critical. The analogy here is perfect. It's like the pistons in an engine firing in perfect time. When the atria and ventricles are in sync, the heart pumps blood incredibly efficiently. When they're not, it can cause all sorts of problems.
So how on earth did they solve this timing problem without any wires? This is where the engineering just gets incredibly cool. They built a tiny accelerometer into the pacemaker. And yeah, it's the same kind of tech that rotates the screen on your smartphone. But instead of sensing you turning your phone, this little sensor can actually feel the physical squeeze of the heart's upper chamber. It picks up that subtle motion, and that tells it the exact moment to trigger a beat in the lower chamber. It's just an amazing way to listen to the heart's natural rhythm.
And the difference this makes for the patient is, well, it's huge. It's night and day. On one side, you have this uncoordinated fixed-rate beat, but on the other, you get this beautiful, synchronized rhythm. Instead of just pacing at some robotic rate, the device is now intelligently responding to what the heart is actually doing. That means much better blood flow and way fewer long-term risks.
But, sensing the atria was really only half the story. The next big question was, what if you need to pace both chambers? That was the next giant leap. It meant you'd need 2 separate leadless devices, one up top and one down below, that could somehow talk to each other wirelessly. And this image right here just lays out the entire evolution for us. It's pretty amazing to see it all in one place. You go from that big, clunky system with wires to the first single-chamber leadless pacers, and then finally to true dual-chamber pacing. Two tiny little capsules coordinating with each other beat to beat, all inside the heart. Incredible.
All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. This table compares the two leading systems out there right now, and you can see they have some really clever but different ways of doing things. Take how they attach to the heart. One uses these little passive hooks, or times, while the other actually has a tiny little corkscrew that gently secures it in place. But the biggest difference is how they sync up. One uses that accelerometer we just talked about to listen, while the other uses true wireless communication between two separate devices.
And that is the real game changer here. I mean, think about it. For the very first time, we can get that perfect, synchronized two-chamber pacing, which is really the gold standard for a lot of patients without any of the risks that come with those old-school wires.
So this tech is already mind-blowing, right? But believe it or not, we're really just scratching the surface. The next wave of innovation is already here, and it's pushing the boundaries even further.
So what's next? What's on the horizon? Well, this is where it gets really futuristic. We're talking about leadless systems for complex heart failure. Combination devices that can also act as a defibrillator to deliver a life-saving shock, and even something called physiologic pacing, which tries to use the heart's own natural wiring for an even better beat. And the ultimate goal? A pacemaker that can actually recharge itself. Here's a perfect example of that. Check out the WISE CRT system. This is a totally new way of thinking. It uses a small transmitter outside the heart to send ultrasound energy to a tiny receiver that's been placed inside the left ventricle. It's pacing with sound waves. It's just wild.
And that leads us to what you might call the holy grail of pacemaker technology. People are working on this right now, finding ways to capture the kinetic energy from the heart's own motion to power the device. If they can crack that, it would solve the last big limitation, battery life. A patient could get one pacemaker that lasts a lifetime.
You know, there's a quote from the research that I think just captures this perfectly. What started out as this really out there conceptual idea in a lab all those years ago has now become a totally established, standard part of how doctors treat patients every single day.
It's just, the pace of innovation here is absolutely breathtaking, isn't it? We went from a wire and a battery to these tiny, self-contained, communicating computers that live inside our hearts. It really makes you stop and wonder, what will they think of next?